And thanks for choosing Morning Live. Now, the SABC has started implementing recommendations regarding irregular appointments at the organisation. At least 28 posts have been identified as having been irregularly filled. Now, the organisation is in the process of informing the affected staff members before approaching the Labour Court. The recommendations are contained in different reports, including one from the Public Protector entitled When Governance and Ethics Fail. Another report was from the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee and another from an investigation conducted by the SABC. And this morning, we're discussing what exactly constitutes proper labour practice when dealing with such matters. And joining us now is labour expert Khomotso Makapane, who is head of labour law and partner at dispute resolution. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So this is always a very curious issue when people are found to have been irregularly appointed into positions, and they may argue that they've gone through the recruitment process like everybody else. So explain to us what sort of difficulty the organisation may encounter in trying to implement these resolutions.
On my way here, I had to think about when were you appointed, just to see you are not one of the 28, but I was satisfied that you're not. I think to start with, the moment you call something irregular, it is because you are saying there are certain set processes and procedures that were not followed. So therefore, I would assume that these investigation reports that were done or that came out indicate that certain processes were not followed. And to the extent that you can prove that internally certain fundamental processes were not followed, then it is only that basis that you can say that the appointment was irregular. So for someone who is being accused of having been irregularly appointed, there are many defenses open to them. Like I did not appoint myself. And I would not have known internally if processes were followed or not. But it is difficult if you know that you were not interviewed, there was no position of vacancy when you came in and stuff like that. So it's fact-based. So we're going to have to look at the facts and assess what is available to the SABC and also to the alleged or accused employees.
And this is where it gets a bit tricky, as you rightly point out, because someone could say, well, I went for an interview, I was subjected to all the processes as per the prescripts of the labour law. What would the organisation then have to prove in this instance in order to make sure that they are able to say this particular appointment was unlawful, it was irregular?
So the first thing is going to have to show or to prove what the policies of the organizations are, to also prove the applicable DOA, delegation of authority at the time, and that either the people did not go through the letter of the process as stipulated in the policies, and or that they are not even recognized in the books of the organization as being employees because of the manner in which they are appointed. And what then becomes important at that point is the policies themselves are not sufficient if there is a prevailing culture at the organization as well, that things are done a certain way. You're also going to have to prove that the appointments did not accord with any accepted culture at the organization. And once you get through that, then you're going to have to prove that that is a reasonable basis or legal basis justifying termination of those contracts on the basis that from the beginning or ab initio, they were not regular. So that is what the organization is going to have to prove to be successful.
Which is not going to be easy. Let's look at a practical example whereby, say, for example, you and I and Leanne and a few others go for an interview, and naturally there is some sort of scoring or grading in that process. And is it par for the course that the person who scores the highest in that interview process naturally gets the job? Is that how it works? Or could you be the lowest in scoring and still be appointed?
It does not always follow that if you are the highest, then you will be appointed. I think in an interview process traditionally, or people will naturally look also at if the person has the right presence, aptitude, attitude, skill, and on the basis of whatever scoring chart they use, if they can objectively justify why someone scored higher but were not appointed and someone was chosen instead, that should be fine. But all this goes back to what your internal policy says. If the SABC policies do not have room for discretion, and it says this is what must happen, and if that did not happen, then that appointment cannot be found to have been done properly. But that is a slightly different question to what, as I understand, is the matter at hand. So what the SABC is alleging seemingly is that certain processes were not followed. It is not that we were wrong in our assessment or in our applying the discretion on who to appoint. But seemingly, as I understand it, it is that processes were not followed at all. So someone did not go through an interview where they were interviewed in accordance with the process, or in accordance with the prevailing policy of the organization, and chosen even though they did not score lower. Instead, they are saying people who did not, or who were not subjected to a process as stipulated in our policies were appointed and found themselves in the organization.
So then there's, of course, the cost to the organization, because whether it is an irregular appointment, whether it is a promotion that is also irregularly affected, it does come at a cost to the organization. So what sort of recourse would the SABC have if they are in fact able to prove that these appointments were irregular against those who affected those appointments and those who benefited from them?
Simply put, I think against those who effected the appointments, then that must be irregular and fruitless expenditure, and civil proceedings may be brought against them to recoup the amount spent or the expenditure. And then for those who benefited, if it can be proven that they willfully participated, it is not something they did not know. They did not know that processes were not followed, but they knew and nonetheless came to the SABC, then the same process can be followed against them as well to recoup the money that was expended on them.
And you say these would be civil suits, not criminal?
At this stage, from what I've seen, there have not been any elements of criminality, but to the extent that people have committed fraud or dishonesty in line with the CPA, then there might be criminal charges. But so far what I've seen, it's just merely been people being appointed when there's not been processes followed, which will fall within the civil suit.
And just another question before we wrap this up. So someone has now been, let's say, irregularly promoted from one position to another. If they claim that everything was done in accordance with the law, and subsequently one of these reports recommends that something needs to be done in order to remove them from the positions that they now occupy, what happens to them? Do they revert to the positions that they previously occupied in the instance where someone was irregularly promoted? Or, do they have to leave the employ of the organization if the organization says so?
The simple answer is they will have to revert back to the position they held previously, and they may be disciplined for that process if they were willing participants in that process. But quickly, just to point out that it is not a clear and simple case to prove, because as you said, if there are dispute of facts, then the matter can be determined through proceedings at the labor court over oral hearing. It's going to have to be evidence that is being led to prove the facts. Because as it stands right now, there are allegations, and to the extent that there are material dispute of facts on those allegations, then there's going to have to be trials to test the veracity and reliability of the evidence. But once proven, an employee will have to revert back to the position that they were before the regular promotion.
And how do you prove that someone was a willful participant in this irregularity?
What we find now is, as I understand, the SIU was involved in this. There would be email trails. There might be computer imaging, cell phone imaging. We do a lot on WhatsApp nowadays. So it's likely that there was a WhatsApp group titled Appoint Me Regular. And if you find these things and you can produce them, then that will be sufficient evidence to prove that someone willfully participated in the process.
Well, Khomotso, thanks so much for your time this morning. Labour expert Khomotso Makapane, who is head of labour law and a partner in dispute resolution, talking to us about the HR processes to be followed in dealing with the unlawful and irregular appointments in the workplace, something that we are currently dealing with here as an organisation at the SABC. Right, we're going to take a break. On the other side of that, of course, we'll have your latest news.